Hi, welcome to my Cathedral of Sound, a love letter to the architects. My name is Cal Van Starling. I'm a creator, a storyteller, a preacher, a metalhead, and a man who has been building a universe in his head since 2004. About a planet with a red dwarf sun, a violet sky, and a silver moon named Eris, and a bloodline of fire wielders that stretches back 1700 years. I didn't build it in a vacuum. No one does. Every creator has a cathedral they worship in before they build their own. And tonight I want to tell you about mine. I want to name the architects. I want to give them honor where honor has been due for a long time. This is for the bands that made me. So I'll start with The Shed and The Misfit, Modest Mouse. Let me start at the beginning, not at the beginning of music, but at my beginning. The moment I understood that the weird kid from nowhere could still make something that mattered. Isaac Brock was a teenager living in a shed behind his stepfather's trailer in Issaquah, Washington, when he formed Modest Mouse. He grew up shuffled between fundamentalist churches and communes while his parents searched for their place in the world. He said, "I was just cargo, me and my sister. It's like a sampler platter of what brand of crazy are we going to be. At the end of the day, I just found my own brand of goddamn crazy," he famously said, according to his Wikipedia. I heard that, and I recognized it in my bones, because when you grow up neurodivergent, when ADHD, autism, and Tourette's and dyscalculia are all operating simultaneously in one body, you spend a long time feeling like fucking cargo. You spend a long time waiting for someone to tell you your brand of crazy is valid. Isaac Brock never waited for that. He went back to the shed and kept making music. That's the first lesson I ever learned about being a creator. The permission you're waiting for isn't coming from the outside, and it never was. Modest Mouse taught me that strange is a feature, not a glitch. That specificity is strength. That the work you make in the shed is worth making, even if nobody is watching. And technically, I'm still in the shed. But from the shed to Fulda, Germany, we go from the misfit to the grand maestro of Fulda, Tobias Sammet. The shed isn't enough by itself. Eventually you have to ask yourself, how big is this allowed to be? In February of 1992, four 14-year-olds in Fulda, Germany, fueled by nothing but teenage passion, formed a band named after their math teacher's nickname. Ed Guy was born. They sent demo tapes to every record label they could find. Every single one rejected them. Undeterred, they self-released their debut album, Savage Poetry, in 1995. Nobody asked for it. Nobody greenlit it. They made it because it existed and it deserved to exist. And then Tobias Sammet looked at a successful band with a following and a career and said, "This still isn't big enough." He didn't just want to write songs. He wanted to build worlds. He wanted a cast of legends from across the entire spectrum of rock and metal, all under one roof, all serving one story. And that's why he created Avantasia, a name he described as a blend of Avalon and Fantasia, a world beyond the human imagination. That's also referred to as a portmanteau, one thing my audience should be familiar considering I used to call myself Scarecrow Canabradio, inspired by Tobias himself. A world beyond human imagination. I have been building Gestoa since 2004. I named my second saga after Tobias Sammet himself, not as tribute, but as canon. Because the joy and trepidation of the Sammet saga demanded a name that carried weight. There is no name in my vocabulary that carries more than his. The lesson Tobias taught me: ambition is not arrogance, scale is not ego, and sometimes the biggest idea in the room is the most honest one you've got. And now we move on to the historians who refuse to flinch. Sabaton. That's right. I've heard a lot of bullshit about them being Nazis. But the truth is actually much more interesting. And then there are the people who taught me that telling the truth about dark things is not the same as endorsing them. Through Sabaton's career, the band has been falsely labeled as Nazi sympathizers and faced pressure from early record labels to change their war-inspired lyrics. They stuck to their guns when their label asked them not to use the word Nazi in the intro track of their second album. Sabaton put the word Nazi in the first verse of Atiro Dominacius. And I probably butchered that Latin, but that's okay. That is not the behavior of people who are afraid of their material. That is the behavior of historians who trust their audience to understand the difference between depicting and endorsing. The frontman, Joachim Broden, said it directly. Nobody would ask Steven Spielberg if he was a Nazi because he made a movie about the Holocaust. It's storytelling. They wrote Inmate 48859 about Witold Pilecki, a Polish man who voluntarily entered Auschwitz to gather intelligence on the Holocaust and get that information to the outside world. They wrote Night Witches in honor of 261 women of the Soviet 588th Night Bomber Regiment who flew anti-German bombing missions from 1942 until the end of the war, 32 of whom died in service. They wrote about Polish resistance fighters, American veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, exiled pilots fighting the battle in Britain, a German fighter pilot who chose not to pull the trigger. The lesson Sabaton taught me: write about darkness without flinching, without apologizing, without letting the laziness of others interpretate or dictate the truth of the work. I carry that into every furnace sermon. I carry it into Moloch, the immortal skykin who slaughtered his own race, written through ideology rather than atrocity. So the reader understands exactly how a reasonable man becomes a monster. Sabaton showed me how to do that. And on from that, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Camelot. Both faces, because I love both eras, Roy Khan and Karavik. They sound so similar you can barely tell them apart. Camelot, they're an American power metal band from Tampa, Florida. Yes, Florida men. Formed by Thomas Youngblood in 1987, they built a mythology, philosophical, literary, conceptual, based at different points on Goethe's Faust. And then they built it around a voice for over a decade. That voice belonged to Roy Khan of Norway. And that voice, it was warm and devastating, operatic, capable of conveying grief and transcendence within the same note. And then Roy Khan had to step away for health reasons. And the world of Camelot fandom held its breath because some voices feel irreplaceable. Enter Tommy Karavik. Grew up in Botkyrka, just south of Stockholm. He started in sports. Music crept in through his family, his sister singing in her room, his mother in a choir, his father picking up a guitar and singing, "How many roads must a man walk before you can call him a man?" One of the first metal songs that hooked him was Dream Theater's Spirit Carries On. Karavik joined Camelot as the lead vocalist in June 2012, and I remember how pissed off I was. Stepping in, I was actually holding a copy of The Black Halo in my hand when the news came in through my headphones. Stepping into one of the most beloved roles in European power metal, and that was mostly about Roy leaving, not Tommy joining. I was willing to give him a chance from the get-go. He said, "I fully understand that this comes with great responsibility and that it will be a big challenge for me as a singer as well as a person. But you can rest assured I will give it my all. From this day, a new journey has begun." And he did it to give it his all. And the new era was different, not lesser. Khan's era was gothic and art and aching and devastated. Karavic's era was vivid and narrative and luminous. Both are real, and both are Camelot. Camelot taught me that a creative body of work can survive transition, that something can be changed without being broken. The Seven Dust Saga ends with the heroes in paradise, reincarnated for a later adventure. A new era, a new voice, but the same soul underneath. Camelot showed me that soul is what survives. The supergroup born from rejection, Master Plan. This is a story I love with my whole chest. In 2001, guitarist Roland Grappaw and drummer Uli Kusch, both veterans of Helloween, were developing a side project. When the other members of Helloween felt they were more focused on a new project than the band, both were fired. The name they chose for what came next was Master Plan, born from the idea that they would be master musicians with the future in their hands, starting the newest power metal band of the new millennium. They got fired, and they turned the firing into Master Plan. When the vocal power of the Norwegian powerhouse Jorn Land united with the musical talent of Grappaw and Kusch in 2002, the whole metal scene woke up. No other band in the last decade had managed to combine the traditional melodic power metal with an up-to-date approach quite like theirs. Jorn Land, the voice that also blessed Avantasia, the voice that connects the Tobias Sammet saga to the Master Plan saga to the canon of Gistoa, where I named Roy Khan as one of the surnames of my protagonist's destiny, honoring both him and the tradition of people who can carry melody like it's a weapon. The lesson Master Plan taught me: things that end one chapter is often the raw material for the next. I have been fired from comfort, from stability, from the easy path more times than I can count. Every time I built something. And that's what you do. That's what they did. And the kids who wouldn't play jazz, Dream Theater. I'd be remiss talking about metal if I didn't mention Dream Theater. And finally, the band that broke the ceiling on what metal was even supposed to be. In 1985, John Petrucci and John Myung arrived in Berklee College of Music in search of a drummer who was also into progressive rock and metal. They heard Mike Portnoy in a palace, this room, and soon began jamming together. The trio gained notoriety at Berklee for constantly playing the rock and metal music. While the other students were interested in classical and jazz, they subsequently dropped out of their studies to concentrate further on the band that would ultimately become Dream Theater. They were at one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. They had every credential, every classical resource, every jazz theory class at their disposal, and they chose metal. They chose complex metal on top of that. They chose 23-minute songs about psychological collapse and spiritual searching and the architecture of grief. And they dared the world to keep up. Dream Theater is why I write dense. Dream Theater is why a scene in the Seven Dust Saga earns 5 pages instead of 1 paragraph. Dream Theater is why I reject the note that says trim this, because some things are supposed to be vast. Some works require you to sit inside them for a while before you understand what they're doing. Dream Theater proved that the audience for vast, complex, demanding art not only exists, it's fiercely loyal. One of the first metal songs that ever reached Tommy Karavik, the man who would eventually carry Camelot as its voice, was Dream Theater's The Spirit Carries On. And the spirit does indeed carry on. That's the whole thesis of the Seven Dust Saga. Zachary's fire bloodline, 1700 years old. Alex's soul placed in him by a man that was himself the reincarnation of a founding father. The spirit always carries on. The Dream Theater wrote that song, and it went on to reach the Swedish kid in Stockholm who grew up to become a grand maestro of power metal, who inspired a kid from St. Augustine, Florida, who built Climb Hazard Studios in metal in Atlanta and named his saga after a man from Fulda who dreamed too large. That's how lineage works in music. That's how it works in everything. And whether these men know it or not, I'm part of their DNA strands. Isaac Brock in his shed, Tobias Sammet at 14 in Fulda, Joachim Brodum refusing to change a word under pressure, Roy Khan devastating a room with silence between notes, Tommy Karabik walking into the most scrutinized chair in European power metal and sitting down in it with grace, Roland Grappa and Uli Kush turning their termination into their finest work, 3 kids at Berklee College refusing to play jazz, and a 37-year-old man in Atlanta with ADHD, autism, and Tourette's, and a daughter he doesn't see enough, and a novel 20 years in the making, and a YouTube channel that crossed 1,000 subscribers, which, my audience, I thank you all. I bow for you. Because y'all are one of the only things keeping me going. I learned from all of you that the work is worth doing. That strange is a feature, not a bug. That big is honest. That darkness can be depicted without endorsement. That transition doesn't break a soul. That rejection is raw material. That density is not a flaw. This has been Cal Van Starling, the Grand Maestro of Climb Hazard Studios. And I'm still in the shed. Stay weird. Peace!